Hey friends, this week on the show, my fantastic conversation with Melissa Presser. She is a Catholic author, blogger, convert from Judaism by way of non-denominational Christianity into the fullness of the faith in the Catholic Church through some incredible experiences meeting God face-to-face, audibly through St. Edith Stein in the Blessed Sacrament, an experience of adoration, which she had no idea what was going on, but felt called and led by God to learn more, experience more, ended up becoming Catholic. Guys, this conversation has everything in it for everyone. I think you're going to really enjoy it. From experiences of trauma, which helped shape Melissa's experience of her faith, to redemptive suffering, to charismatic, Pentecostal, Holy Spirit-filled experiences of God and the saints, and I don't even know, guys. There's a ton in here, and it's amazing. I hope you do enjoy it. Please leave me some feedback in the comments. Please like this video. If you like it, subscribe to our channel, and share it with people who need to hear this stuff. It's great. Melissa's a great storyteller, an awesome writer. Here's her story in all of its beautiful truth with very little varnish, because that's just the way she is. It's an awesome journey, experience, conversation. Please enjoy. Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. If you are listening on podcast, thank you. Please make sure you leave a rating and reviews. That helps to push the podcast out to more people. And if you are watching on YouTube, hey, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the like button so the video gets out there and more people see this and hear this awesome story this week. My guest this week is Melissa Presser. She is a Jewish girl who was led home to the Catholic Church by St. Edith Stein. That's fantastic. A fellow Jewish Catholic. She is a wife, a mother of three, an attorney who is scary in court, she tells me, a writer and an author. Melissa's new book about her conversion, Walk the Land, is being released chapter by chapter at Missio Dei. I'll put links to that in the show notes, and it'll be available in print later next year. She is, I think, one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter lately. More about that in a second, but Melissa, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show, and hello.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
You are one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter, and I'll tell you why. I have a very, for my own mental health, I have a very kind of curated list of people that I follow on Twitter. It's open to follow me, but people that I actually follow and see in my timeline is very much locked down for my own sanity and mental health reasons. I would engage far too often if I had a wider timeline. But you are somebody who's always popping up there with incredibly encouraging, positive things, time after time. You're the one in my timeline that I'm like, yes, thank you. Thanks for being here. So thank you for your Twitter presence. It's wonderful. You really do brighten up the Catholic Twitter sphere with your tweets all day long.
Oh, yeah. Melissa. I appreciate that. I am not a social media person, so I was really sort of taken aback with my when I got on Twitter and people started to follow me, and I'm like, I don't even know how to work this thing. So, I really try to keep it encouraging, but it is quite the challenge to be out of the Twitter sphere. So I appreciate the feedback because, there's a lot of us out there that are trying to make a difference,
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And I think I first came across you because you were just cracking jokes, I think, left, right, and center. And I thought, who is this person? I have to have her on the show because it was wonderful. It was brightening everyone's day. So thank you. Listen,
I appreciate it.
Your story sounds really fascinating. I think you were on EWTN at one point to first share your story. That's where I first heard of you. And gosh, it's a really interesting and exciting and dramatic, kind of emotional story. And I thought, perfect guest for this show, because this show, we try and showcase stories like this for non-Catholic Christians, looking into the Catholic faith for new Catholics, to help people to hear others' journeys and be encouraged by those stories, and maybe see themselves in some of the questions that you asked or I asked as I was becoming Catholic. And so I want to kind of get out of the way and let you tell your story, and we'll stop along the way and we unpack some things as we go, dig into places that guests or that listeners might find more interesting. We can dig deeper there, but for now, I want you to just go back as far as you want to go back, start wherever you want to start, and let's kind of unpack your faith journey that eventually ended you up in the Catholic Church, wherever you want to begin.
Oh my God, what a long story. I always say when I went on EWTN, I gave everybody the vanilla version. So these days I'm giving everybody the behind the scenes details. But, which is sort of crazy, right? But, that's part of what my book is about, is really giving those undertones, of what really happened. And what really happened was when I was around 3, I had a private revelation from God. It was a very comforting revelation. I had sort of him appear to me, and almost like a consoling figure. It's very bizarre that I remember this, but it's very etched in my memory. And I remember thinking, like, I can't believe, that God would come to me. And I didn't know, obviously, what was going to happen in my life. But now I know, looking back and even writing the book, that he knew that I was going to be enduring some trauma in my life. And so that was something to hold on to as I endured that trauma. I know, a lot of the shows I go on, or people I talk to, especially whether, people are considering the church, or wherever people are in their spiritual journey, I like to be very honest, because trauma really isn't talked about a lot, in these sorts of spaces. And it's important, to talk about it. I suffered from sexual abuse trauma. And so that private revelation is something that I held on to, during some of my darker times. And I was always, just questioning. It wasn't so much I was angry with God. I wasn't that wasn't my, sort of reaction. It was just sort of like, this is my lot in life. I'm going to suffer. And I sort of just kind of got used to that in terms of the sufferings that I went through. And I believe, it's my belief that that's what actually made me, not want to say more Jewish, but that's what actually made me more religious. Because as I talk about in the book, my parents were not religious. So my parents are both Jewish. My whole family is Jewish on both sides. And I was raised in a non-religious household, but I had this, fervor to go to temple. And so I did, and my parents would, drop me off like on the side of the road, here you go, it's time to go to, you want to go to temple? Sure, we'll give you a ride. And, I was a very faithful Jew. I went to temple. I was desperate to go to Hebrew school. I lobbied my parents, about why I should go to Hebrew school. And, I have memories dating as far back. Like, I was so excited to be in Hebrew school, because I hadn't been in Hebrew school with all the other kids up until that time. And they were like, this girl's a freak, like, why is she so happy to be here? Like, my parents forced me to go here, But, to be honest, I really felt, the trauma was a secret. Obviously, nobody knew about it. And so that's where I felt very close to God, when I went to shul on Saturday and, celebrating the Jewish holidays and being part of the synagogue. That was really a big, huge part of my life. And then preparing to be a bat mitzvah, which, for those people that don't know, is sort of like the Jewish transition from, childhood to adulthood, sort of a rite of passage of sorts, right? Like, kind of like confirmation-ish. And so that was kind of where I was going with everything. I think for someone like me who went through trauma, there was just that natural line of questioning, right? About, well, why did bad things happen to good people? I get asked that question a lot in my ministry. And so I was a very inquisitive child. I always thought to myself, it was sort of an odd thought, but I always thought to myself, like, why would God want me to die if I'm this intelligent? Meaning, like, I have this brain in my head, right? And it was, I always used to joke with my friends, and I'm like, I may not be the most, gorgeous, and I may not be, I can't play a musical instrument and all the other things I couldn't do. I was like, but I'm really smart. I'm really smart. And, and God sort of like encapsulated this brain. That was what really kind of drove me. Like, well, why would I have this like suffering on one hand and then this, intellect on the other hand? And somehow I thought he wanted to do something with that. And that was sort of the thought that drove me,
Yeah. I think it's so fascinating that you had that revelation at such a young age, and that was something that you could hold on to like that. Because that kind of a thing, that kind of trauma for most people would drive them far away from any kind of religion, especially if you're being raised in a nominal household. I mean, that alone might be something that you would be repelled from. Well, of course, religion can't help me in this situation because my parents don't even really believe in this, despite being of this background, right? But for you, that was a thing to hold on to. That's really remarkable that God would do that and would work in your life like that. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I never, people have asked me so many questions about that time period, or were you angry with God, or did you have like this disdainful relationship with God? And I didn't have, I think it had to have been a grace because I didn't have any of that. I've actually felt closest to God when I was praying in Hebrew because, I was raised in a conservative synagogue, so we didn't pray in English. And I don't know. I just thought Hebrew was this divine language, right? And I felt so special when I learned Hebrew because I'm not Israeli, so I didn't grow up speaking Hebrew, and which is another, total misnomer. I don't know why people think American Jews speak Hebrew. They don't. Unless you're Israeli. My husband's Israeli, so that was his first language. But I just felt that was really the only place, when I was younger, to gain some solace. I think as I got older and started asking questions, that sort of shifted a little bit because I think I still had a little bit of that childhood innocence of, okay, well, I've got to run to somebody or do something. And because my pain was silent, I think because God was sort of silent, right? Because God is not like, you're not walking into him on the street corner. So you have to kind of find him in that hiddenness. And I always was a bit contemplative, I was always a little different. And so I think that's kind of was the setup, I would say, before my like late teens.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating, and it mirrors in a small way my experience because I became evangelical Christian in my early kind of teens, and I went to church, evangelical church, with my friend down the street, and I'd be the one in my household getting up and showering. Everyone's still sleeping, my parents are still in bed, and waiting on the porch for him to pick me up and take me to church with him. There's that interesting experience of going alone like that, right? And you were younger than that, going on your own. I think that's so fascinating that for you, I mean, in that Jewish context, that was for you how to express that faith, how to understand where to place that faith, right? In the same way that somebody in a Christian household would go to church, right? You took the same energy, that same calling from God, drawing you to temple. That was the context that you knew. I think that's really fascinating and amazing zealousness for somebody of, to be wanting to go to Hebrew school and those kind of things, like, and then of course getting there and being the odd person out who really wants to be there, right? Every time. I think that's amazing. So where did you go from there? This very kind of zealous kid, this experience of trauma. What was the next step for you on this journey?
I think, for me, like many trauma victims, trauma sort of reveals itself over time.
Yeah.
I think it's a confusing time because you start having all the symptomology and you're like, where's this coming from? And so I started to question a lot of things, well, why, are my friends not going to go to heaven? And why am I separate than my friends? And why won't the rabbi answer my question? And why can't females read on, go on the bima? Why can't, and nobody would answer my questions. And I was pretty persistent, about this. I just wanted some answers, and I asked about, I think at one point I may have even asked about Jesus. And there was just no answers. And, my parents didn't have answers because they weren't religious people. And I think over time I was just like, I'm not getting my answers. And I think a lot of it was at that point in my life, I was very into, I would consider myself a feminist. I actually started like the first national organization women chapter in the Southeast region or something crazy like that as a teenager. I just sort of found my voice and with that group of people, and I became sort of like an individualist. But I also had a very spiritually dark, I guess, kind of thing to me because I was very spiritually connected. I still sort of had that image of God. I was not an atheist. I was not an agnostic. I was still Jewish because, Judaism is a culture and it's an ethnicity, it's an identity. So, but I would still, go to temple on the high holy holidays and do that. But I think the trauma started to sort of unravel. And then once I got to college, I really couldn't find a home. I had gone to Hillel a couple of times, and I was just like, I am not feeling this, like this is not for me. So, I started to explore other options, more Eastern religions. And I read a lot of self-help books, like if I told you, I think I read every self-help book that ever existed on the shelf. Because I was like, it was more of an individualistic attitude than it really was getting very deep into other religions. Because I think as a Jewish person, I was like, well, I know I'm Jewish. I mean, what else am I going to be? Like, I don't really have a fascination for religion. It was more so like it was an identity crisis is what it was, and I had to sort of cling to something. And it was just like constant, well, who am I and why am I created? And, what is my purpose in life? And I think when that started to come around for me and shape for me was I had really wanted to be a writer. That was my lifelong goal since I was right before I was born, and with the abuse, I was just like, you know what, I've got to dedicate my life to helping other victims. And so that was a pretty pivotal moment in my story. I even, I remember writing about this too in the book. I was sort of sitting there after, a failed counseling session. And I was like, you know what, forget everybody else. I am going to take this into my own hands as a vigilante, and I'm going to go to law school, and I'm going to represent kids who were abused. And that was sort of like my calling, that I was going to be this, savior, for lack of a better word, I was going to be this savior. And that was the way I was going to channel my energy. So that's sort of what happened during my high school and college years.
That sounds a lot like you. I feel like
right. See, I'm the same person as Twitter. Right?
That's amazing. That's amazing. So I feel like at that, not to say that you're super old, but at that time of your life, like trauma and these kinds of things, I don't think we're as widely talked about as they are now, right? I think we're a lot more as a culture sensitive and aware of these things. But for me, like, of course you read all those self-help books, maybe looking for kind of an answer to these things that weren't talked about a lot back then. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, there was no such thing as trauma. It didn't exist. Yeah. Especially for kids who, like me, it's like I grew up in a middle class home. I didn't grow up in an abusive home. I grew up with wonderful, loving parents. I didn't know anything about trauma. I didn't know anything about PTSD. I thought my behaviors were all, because God had put some suffering mark on me. I didn't really know, but I did attribute it to something divine. I just sort of said, oh, okay, well, I'm suffering because God is allowing me to suffer, and this is my lot in life, and honestly, I didn't know that. I think I was going to make it past 30. I had this like mark, like, I don't think I'm going to make it past 30, but in the time that I'm alive, I'm going to do this great work, and I'm going to, do my best to avenge or whatever you want to call it, all these children who, have nobody to speak up for them, because ultimately what I ended up doing was representing children in foster care who were both abused, abandoned, and neglected, and were also in criminal court. So I had all the cases that nobody else wanted, very deep end psychiatric cases, and I felt a kinship with these kids because they didn't have parents. So a lot of them didn't have parents. So, I didn't know any other way to deal with my trauma because, it just wasn't, like you said, it wasn't something that was talked about. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a really interesting way to deal with it. I think that's really fascinating. Would you have recognized that as a calling from God on your life to do that kind of thing? Was that something that you would have felt like this is, you mentioned that you kind of felt like God gave this a lot in life. Was this a way of using that you felt God was calling you towards in some way?
I felt a very distinct purpose. Yes. I felt that it fulfilled that need in me. It was very fulfilling work, but slowly what happens when you're a trauma survivor that doesn't get help, and then you're exposed to secondhand trauma on a daily basis, you just start to unravel. And that's exactly what happened. I just started to deteriorate pretty rapidly, and I would say so rapidly that, I was like, I've got to find another area of law. But, unfortunately for me, I was like, oh, I'm just going to go into criminal defense work. And that'll make it easier, like, because I'm going to be dealing with, I was a public defender. So I was like, I'm going to be dealing with people who are indigent and who are accused of crimes. And I won't be dealing with maybe the child aspect as much. And so I was slowly trying to move away from that. But, as anybody knows, the criminal justice system, that's just a different exposure. So,
yeah. So where was your faith going at this point? It sounds like you were trying to deal with these things on your own, in maybe a good way. That's a very laudable goal you had, a thing you were doing there. But where was your faith going at this point?
I didn't really have any faith. I mean, it was more tradition, like I would celebrate the high holy holidays and things like that. Around that time, I met my husband. He's Israeli, and the best way I could describe him is he was like an Israeli Jewish atheist, like he had no religious background whatsoever. I mean, in terms of like his own practice. And, and I was really trying to get him like, well, let's do Shabbat, because his family did Shabbat and on Fridays. And so I was like, this is so nice, let's do Shabbat. And he was so not about it, he was so like, this is ridiculous, and that almost prompted me to be the opposite. And so I found myself like trying again to reimmerse myself in Judaism and to find a way. But at that point, I was sort of more towards the Chabad. And in the Chabad, that's even almost was worse for me, because there's, a sheet between men and women, and, females were in a different area. And, you can't read it all. And it just really pushed me over the edge, because I was like, the more religious I was trying to get, the farther away I felt from God. So I was like, this isn't working. This is not going to work for me.
So you just quit?
Did I quit? I said, God, I quit.
That's the end of your story.
Yeah, there you go. At the end of the show. Well, an interesting thing happened. Around 2007, my grandmother died. She was the closest person in my life. And I made a conscious decision to walk away from God. I told God at the cemetery, I wasn't like Edith Stein. I wasn't an atheist. I was just like, I know you're there, and I'm going to go my way, and you can go yours. And you took the most important person in my, like, you already took all my innocence, or allowed all my innocence to be stolen, and now you took the most important person in my life. So just leave me alone, basically. And that started a very difficult path, because then I didn't even have that. I didn't even have that divine presence in my life, and so that's when my trauma really started to unravel. A lot of things in my life started to unravel. It was just a really dark, difficult time, without getting into a lot of the details, which are, sort of unnecessary. But I still, was like, I don't need help. I'm fine. And then I just got to a place where I wasn't fine. And I remember one night talking to my husband, and I was like, if you could, who's the best person, like, I don't know. I ask these weird questions, who's the best person, like, all around person, and at the same time, we both said the same person, which is Karen. And Karen is my husband's best friend, if you can follow this track, mother-in-law. And did not know she was a Christian, didn't know anything about this lady. I just knew, I'm like, whoever she is, like, I want to be just like her. She could be whatever she is, I want to be her. And so at the time I was on Facebook, and I messaged her, and, telling her my life was falling apart, whatever I said. And I said, can I go to church with you? And she's like, oh, you have a divine appointment. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't know what a divine appointment is. I'm like, okay. And I remember, because this part's so funny, like, I remember, like, I was dressed up like I was going to shul, like I had like a long black, skirt on, and like this proper top, and very conservative, and then I walk into this non-denominational church, and they're all wearing cutoffs and like flip-flops, and I looked so strange, I was like, oh my gosh. And we sat down, and I was like, God's just going to strike me with lightning right here in this church, And they had a traveling preacher that weekend, because their pastor was on, some mission trip. And this preacher is like talking about everything that was going on in my life. I mean, like everything. And I look over at Karen, and I go, how could you do this? Like, you told this pastor all my problems, and how could you betrayed me? And she's crying, and she's like, it's the Holy Spirit. I'm like, what is the Holy Spirit? Now it's kind of funny, to reenact the whole thing. But, and I was like, I felt like I was like, remember that show Punked on MTV? Like, I was like, I'm on Punked. Like, this is not normal, And when we got done, we were both like in tears. I was angry. She's trying to explain to me what's going on. And so afterwards, we were sitting on the couch, and she explained to me what the Holy Spirit was. She explained to me that God was, calling me to himself. And she said to me, can I pray over you? And I had never heard anybody pray in English ever. Like, I've never heard it, and she just started to pray over me in English. And I just the tears that were just running down my face, because I was like, oh my, like, I understood what she was saying, and it was like a St. Paul conversion. Like, I was like, buy me a Bible and I'm a Christian girl. Like, I was just sold. But what was interesting also, something that I missed was, that first time that I went to church that I was describing. So that night when I came home, I was like, this couldn't be true, because Jews don't believe in Jesus, only Gentiles believe in Jesus, right? And I remember I got on my knees, and I had these like 3 pictures of my kids, because I had kids by then, in front of me. And I was like, Jesus, whoever you are, if you save my life, I'll serve you for the rest of my life, because I really didn't see a way out. For the people that have suffered from suicidal ideation, like, that's why they take that way out, because they don't see, a way out. And that was it for me. And all I remember is him, when I say Jesus picking me up off the floor, and I ended up in my bed, and that was it. I was like, okay, I made a promise, and I'm going to be like St. Paul, and I'm going to go be a Christian girl. I don't know what that means, but that's what I'm going to do.
It means buying a Bible, like you did. I did.
I bought a Bible. I stuck a cross on. I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I think
well, remember, I was a rebel. Remember, I'm a rebel. So I'm. People always ask, "What's your motto?" I'm like, "Go hard or go home." So. I was like stuck a cross on, and my Jewish father's like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? What's going on?
How was that received by your family at that time? Like, was that, because, my experience for me becoming evangelical Christian out of a nominally Christian household, that was kind of like, oh, Keith's got a new thing he's doing here. Like, he's trying something new, right? He's going to youth group, and he's going to church on Sundays, and he's getting up early and going, and it was kind of a fascination, right? But from a context of, even cultural Judaism, I think, right, to become Christian, that sounds like that could be a recipe for trouble, for strife.
I think my family was, because they were not religious, they're like, we're not going to touch this theologian with a 10-foot pole. I think religiously, you remember, I conducted our Passover Seders. Right. I had a background, and so they couldn't really question me theologically, because they didn't have that knowledge. But there was such a conviction in me. It was like I had met Jesus himself, which I did, And I think the only words that ever transpired, might have been my dad asking my husband, like, what's up with the cross, and Shlomi's like, ask her, and that was like, let's eat, that was really like about it. My parents, most Jewish parents, I can't speak for every Jewish parent, but would have disowned their kid. My parents, I have to say, are the 2 most wonderful people. And they were just like, okay, that's what you want to do. That's who you're going to be. You're the same person, and, go do good in the world. And, I always joke, I think I was joking too, you might've read on Catholic Twitter in the beginning. I was like, I blame my mother for being a Catholic, because she's the one taught me about mercy and goodness and giving to the poor. And I'm like, she made me a Catholic, because she did. She's a wonderful person.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I always say, similar to my journey, I don't mean to make it all about myself, but it resonates to me when you're saying that. Like, I always say that there are these graces for me that in advance of my becoming even Christian, right? Like, I was raised in a household that respected mercy and justice and kindness and compassion, and recycling was very important to us at the time. not a spiritual gift, but right. And so I feel like, and I somehow, even though I had friends that were in the punk rock scene in high school, and I was thick in that for a while, I avoided all the pitfalls that would normally have been there for me, right? God gave me these graces in advance of me even becoming Christian, which I always look back and go, wow, how did I get that? It's kind of amazing, but this happens, right? Like God knows what we need before we even know we need it, and gives it to us in many cases, right? I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, my parents were wonderful. I mean, I didn't get the same reaction from a lot of other people and went through a really difficult time, but I didn't care. I mean, I was so high on Jesus. I was just like, and people thought I was nuts, like immediately I'm on Facebook, I'm evangelizing. And I had this crazy charism, which I don't even know if I talked to anybody about this yet, but I knew the New Testament. Like I have no idea. I had never read it before, but I was teaching Bible studies. I guess God gave me some grace to have infused me with the knowledge of the New Testament. And I was just on my way. I didn't even think about the pushback or the hate or any of that, because I was just so hot on a high from, like, I went from one day, going to end my life to the next day, God saving my life. And I was like, I'm like I'm from Miami. So like, in Miami, it's like, I got your back, it's all good. And I'm like hardcore like that. I'm like, Jesus got my back, so I'm going to have his back, and I didn't care. And I got so much hate and crap online from people I knew, and they're like, you're nuts, you're crazy. I had a friend that called my dad. It's so funny, and my dad was scared to tell me, but messaged him and was like, we're really worried about Melissa, maybe you need to put her in a mental place, because and I said, Dad, I'm like, you should email her back and say, like, well, then maybe you should put like 1.38 billion Catholics into a mental institution, because that's essentially what she's arguing. So my dad had nothing good to say back to me, because he's like, okay, but yeah, and I had to start all over again with friends and that whole life. And I really was into my church, and I just didn't care. And then eventually my husband accepted Christ as his Lord and Savior. That's a whole nother show. And so we were these, like, the joke I used to make, I was like, our poor parents, like we were two Jewish lawyers who became Christians. So
that's incredible. That's amazing. Did you ever do anything with the Messianic Jewish movement? Because I know I've had guests on this show before who that for them was a gateway into Catholicism. Was that ever on your radar anywhere in your experience as someone with a Jewish background becoming Christian?
So we tried it only because my husband did not want to go. He was not a fan of that, and I said, "Well, let's just go, because there seemed like nice people." And I was there for, we obliged, whatever it was, and for us that was a no-go. Like, that was just like, we do not belong here. So I mean, people would think that it's natural, but it's not. The whole reason you become Christian is to sort of have that fulfillment and that completion. Right. And I'm like, if I wanted to go to shul, I would go back to my conservative synagogue or go to the Chabad. Like, why would I come here? Because so you sprinkle in Jesus a couple of times. Like, that's the way I saw it. Like, I wanted a new life. I wanted that new life that was promised. And it didn't mean that I wasn't going to honor what I had. It just meant that I was moving forward, is what it meant for me.
Yeah. And that makes sense. So, very fired up new Christian in your faith. What happened? Because here you are today. You're Catholic. So
no, I'm Catholic. So
so what went wrong?
What went wrong? Well, I'll tell you what went wrong. So during this time, I always rely on that verse in the book of Joel, to restore the year the locusts have eaten, and I think it's in Joel 2. And so God was restoring. I was writing, I was blogging. I had a very popular, I wasn't like some viral sensation, but, I had a very popular blog, and I was writing for our local Christian paper, very connected in my church. And an Anglican gal who was, I was friendly with on the blogging scene, the Christian blogging scene, was like, emails me and she's like, hey, you remind me so much of Edith Stein. And I'm like, who the heck is Edith Stein? And she's like, you've got to read these books. She's incredible. You will love her, blah, blah, blah. Well, at about the same time, I don't know exactly the time frame, but I had this sensation, or this like Holy Spirit sort of infused thing going on that was telling me to pray in a chapel setting. It was so specific. It clearly did not come from me, And so I was, at the same time, I was calling around to all these churches and saying, hey, like, are you open during the day? I want to come there and pray. And everybody's like, no, we're not open. And I'm like, what's up with that? Like, God's not closed, like what's up with that? And the only place that was open was a Catholic church. And I was like, that ain't not happening. That is not happening. I'm not going to the Catholic church. And I would find myself sitting in the parking lot of a parish that was down the street from where I worked at the time. And I would just sit in the parking lot and I would just cry. I'm like, God, don't make me do it. Like, please, like, I already lost everything in my life. Like, please don't make me Catholic, And I didn't even know a Catholic either. So I was kind of going through all these things. At the same time, I was reading my way through Edith Stein. And it was just the first page already. First page, I opened it up and it was like, Edith Stein was born on October 12th. Well, that's my birthday. And I was like, okay, this is bizarre. And then I keep reading. It's like sentence like 5. And it was like, Edith Stein's grandmother's name was Adelheid. And my grandmother's name is Adelaide, which is the English version of the German name. And I just closed the book. I was like, this is too much. This is way too much for me. And as I read, I was like, what is the Eucharist? What is that? Because I'd always felt very weird about taking communion in the Protestant church. I told my husband, like, this is weird. Like, this doesn't feel right, because liturgically I was missing everything that was going on in the Bema. There was no richness or tradition. And it was so far from what I understood as a Jewish person. I'm like, there's got to be something else, And so eventually those kind of worlds collided, those two things that, having the books and reading about Edith Stein and the Eucharist, and then also, having this, I got to go pray in a chapel. And I don't know how it happened, but one of the guys at work who's Catholic, he's like, I'm going to take you into the chapel. I'm like, no, And it just so happened, just a coincidence, that the Blessed Sacrament was exposed. And he just took me in and I'm like, you're not going to explain anything to me? He's like, nope, I just want you to sit. And he would, point some things out to me, like the Stations of the Cross. And he's like, I just want you to go and I want you to kneel and I don't want you to say anything. I want you to look at that monstrance and I don't want you to say anything. And I was like, okay, I can do that, And I did that and something happened. I don't know what happened, but something happened. And so I went back to work because it was during, my lunch break. And I'm like, I got to go back tomorrow and see whatever's in there, something happened. And I came back the next day. It's like some stealthy mission. I'm like, does anybody see me, go out, leave my work and for lunch. And I go into this chapel and I'm like, what do you want from me? Like, who are you? Like, I don't even know what this is, And then I was leaving the church and I audibly heard God say to me, Melissa, it's time to come home. And I was like, what? Are you sure? I was like, and again, I was like, I didn't even know anybody that was Catholic. I mean, I did, but not a practicing Catholic. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be a bumpy ride. So that's the short version of how it happened.
I think that's amazing. That one of the reasons why you became Catholic is because the churches were open. I think that's really fascinating. Like nothing else is open to go and pray. But here's this Catholic church that happens is open and you can go and pray. I think that's amazing. I think it's amazing too that I don't know if you knew this, probably not at the time, but one of the challenges that Peter Kreeft, this famous Catholic philosopher and theologian guy, talks about for non-Catholics is to go and pray in front of the Blessed Sacrament, like go to adoration. That's his one, if you want to know if the church is true or not, go and do that. Because he's convinced that God will show himself, right? If you actually go and here's proof that challenge seems to work, right? Because you went there and you felt something and had no idea what was going on. I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, I had no idea what was going on. I mean, obviously, and then it was like sort of an addiction. Like I was just like, oh, okay. Like I had to go to adoration every day. And and adoration became a very big part of my life. But at the time, I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I was doing. I later learned that it was the real presence of Christ. I didn't know that at the time, but then I was like, hey, I guess I was obedient. So I was like, I guess I got to go find a Catholic church, and that's exactly what I did. I, found a Catholic church to go to.
It's amazing that just not even knowing what is happening there, that still drew you in somehow, right? You had this kind of radar, that ping that told you to come do this, and you got something out of doing that, even though you didn't really understand what you were doing. Like that's such an authentic and interesting way of encountering Christ in the Eucharist, to just being drawn to it, despite not knowing the theology and like all the stuff that goes behind that, right? Just experiencing that. I think that's really interesting, that experience of that, then drawing you deeper.
Yeah, I think, listen, God knit me together. So he knew I was, sort of this mystic, contemplative, person. And I was, even though I say, I partially read my way into the church, kind of like Edith Stein. There were so many other factors, that contemplative side of me, that otherworldly, that supernatural, that's what I was listening to. I didn't, the world was going on around me, but I was like, whatever's going on here, I don't really have a choice. This is what God is asking me to do. And I had already come that far. I was like, and I made a promise, and I was like, I'm not, even if I lost everything, which I did, again, I had lost, friends and all of that stuff coming into the church. And my husband, who was, I wouldn't say he was anti-Catholic because he was a Protestant at the time, but was like, a Catholic church? Like, are you crazy? Like, what are you doing? That was a challenge because I had to come into the church without my husband, and that was that presented its own challenges, but I didn't see it as a choice. Like, I didn't see it as like, well, am I going to do this thing? It was like, okay, this is, I've been searching for truth since, I was a little girl, and this is the same God that I've been following since I, can remember, since I'm 3. And it's the same God as in this private revelation is the same God that, showed up at Hebrew school, my bat mitzvah, and, now he's in a Catholic church. So I'll follow him there too,
Yeah. Did you see it as that kind of fulfillment? Like you said before, in the Protestant church, like non-denominational context, communion was kind of a strange thing for you. And I can get that too, even not coming from a ritualistic kind of religious background. I always felt like awkward and strange just passing this thing around, and like why it was always so long and arduous for me. I don't really know why. It just didn't feel right. And then for me, experiencing the Eucharist and communion in the Catholic Church, it's like, yeah, this makes sense. This is infusing grace into me. I'm consuming Christ. I'm becoming more like Christ. This is the process happening here. For you, I mean, it's an even different context in the sense that, right, that ritual that you experience, right, in the Jewish context, right, that's so meaningful and weighty and important. And I can see going from that to just this kind of very stale, kind of, sometimes literally stale bread, but that bland kind of experience of communion, right? I can see how you long for more than that. So did that, when you found that, did that then feel like the fulfillment of your journey that you kind of went through Protestantism to the Catholic Church? That kind of feel like a complete kind of narrative from your Jewish upbringing?
Yeah, I knew I was home. I knew I was home. I had told someone, so I hadn't gone, I had to go to a mass, obviously. I had to go to my first mass. And so I went to mass with the same friend that had brought me to adoration. And, only God could set things up, right? I went to a church, his church, and they happened to have, and that particular, this is pre-COVID, obviously, but he had 4 chalices lined up on the altar, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the 4 cups, it's Passover, and I had no clue that not every parish didn't serve 4. Remember, I'm just there for the first time, and God had like set this table up like just for me, right? And I'm freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, it's Passover, and I'm coming out and I'm telling my friend, I'm like, did you see the 4 cups? He had no clue. He's a Cordial Catholic, no clue what I was talking about. And it was just mind boggling. Like, I can't believe this. And I walked out, and the priest was, I introduced myself. He's like, so I hear, you're going to go to RCIA. And I'm like, what's RCIA? And he's like, I heard you're going to become a Catholic. I'm like, oh, Father, no, I'm just here visiting, and, all that kind of stuff. But like, had all those things not been set up, had there been 1 chalice there, I wouldn't have seen it, I wouldn't have seen it because liturgically, I mean, it's similar, but there's a lot of symbolism, in Judaism as there is in Catholicism. And just seeing those four cups, I think, Scott Hahn has like 55 talks on the four cups, like, I'm exaggerating, but, it was just so meaningful to me. And I was just like, I get this, because you have a cup of wine at different, different points in the Passover dinner, and you're waiting for Elijah and like all this other stuff. So it was really cool to see that.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And it's amazing how, I mean, your journey is so marked by encounters with God, like, right, again and again and again, and that such a continuous kind of narrative. I think that's so interesting that, like you say, it's the same God you encountered as a 3-year-old that you encountered then, leading you to the Catholic Church. I think that's so interesting that that's a continuous kind of theme of your journey. I want to know what's next when you're going to encounter him next. We've got to be listening for you to share that word from God for us. I think that's amazing. Can we talk a bit more about how Edith Stein kind of played a role in your journey? You said you read some of her and of course encountered these crazy coincidences in quotations, almost right away. Did you have a sense of the saints at all at that point? Like, I know it was something that was totally off my radar as a non-denominational Christian. We had no idea of, or no context for talking with the saints at all. And I actually asked that question once with the saints of my pastor, and was kind of just, no, we don't kind of believe that, kind of was the answer. And I thought, well, but these people do. What's that deal? Where were the saints? Were the saints at all on your radar when you first encountered Edith Stein?
No, I was reading her sort of just like as this historical figure, and she made a lot of sense to me because I had studied the Holocaust for a long time. And obviously being a Jewish person, the Holocaust was something that I was very close to and had read a lot about, and very much part of who I was, in terms of, ancestry and all of that. So, the fact that she had grown up, sort of the same as me, and she was an intellectual and she wants to be a professor, and we had so many similarities. Like, it was just so bizarre, and she had gone a different route. I mean, she had gone into a more philosophical route, into a study called phenomenology, but it didn't really matter what you called it, because I was, I had gone into law, and these things are sort of connected, and asking questions and analyzing. And so I just saw her as sort of like a friend. I saw her like, wow, like this is like my spiritual sister. This is somebody who was like on the other side. And reading her story about how she became a nun and then ended up ultimately perishing in Auschwitz. I think it was really, to me, like everything was meaningful, but the fact that she perished in the Holocaust because she was a Jew, not because she was a Catholic, because she was a Jew. Even now, like that even saying that out loud, because, causes a lot of controversy, right? But it's the truth. It's the truth. And I felt that connection to her there in history. Had I been alive during that time, had I lived in Germany, all those things I thought about. And so I didn't even really think about her as like a saint as much as I did somebody who was real and existed, and, is somebody I would have loved and known, or wanted to know while, she was alive.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. And so you had this experience in adoration. You went to mass. You quickly, I think, became Catholic, right? There was not a long lag period for you, as you said, being obedient and following the Spirit. So what's that experience like for you to make that shift? You mentioned that you, again, like you lost some friends. There was strife, not maybe strife's the wrong word, but a disconnect between you and your family, because you're leaving this one paradigm for another, becoming Catholic. What was that experience like for you, going down that road, leaving those things behind?
I think the hardest thing was God had started my writing again, and I was very successful, and I was kind of like on the upswing of that non-denominational Christian writing group, and I was getting, courted and all that stuff. And I was on our writing team. So we were part of like very big apps and all kinds of stuff. And it all got taken away. Every Christian publication I wrote for dropped me because I was Catholic. And even one of my editors, like with tears in her eyes, was like, "You're my best writer." And and I was like, but I don't write theology pieces, like I won't write about the Virgin Mary. Like I write lifestyle pieces, I don't write, and they just couldn't deal with it, and God had already told me this was going to happen, but going through it, I think is a little different. I think that was, I know it sounds a little crazy, but that was the hardest thing for me because I had finally seen some restoration in my suffering. And so coming into the church, then I also had the burden of what I did was I had 3 little kids at the time. So I had I think my twins were 4 and the little one was 3. And I went to four masses a weekend. I took each child by themselves and then I went to my own mass so that I could explain to them, what was going on. Because remember, my husband had no want to go to church. And right away, I think people saw me, this mother who's by herself and sitting in the back and whispering to her kid and pointing out things. And it was right away, the people at that particular parish were like, you're new. And, and then once they found out I was a Jewish, convert that was going into RCIA, I was like, oh, well, I'm waiting to go into RCIA. And because I think it was July at the time and RCIA, starts in the fall. And so that's what I did. I did that for months. I went to 4 masses a weekend. And it was crazy. And one day I listened to a lot of Catholic radio. And I remember one day, and I think I talked about this on Twitter too. I called into Father, I think Larry Richards, and I was like, what do I do with my husband? He's not Catholic. And he was like, give him to the Blessed Mother, give him over to the Blessed Mother. So me and the kids, every mass would go up to Our Lady of Guadalupe because she was, there was a statue of her in front of, inside the parish. And I would literally, my prayer was super simple. I would stretch out my arms and I would say, here you go. That was my prayer. Here you go. And, I wasn't afraid because I know that God doesn't break up families, and that was what was driving me. I'm like, there's no way that after everything that I've been through, God is going to break up my family. There's just no way. And, over time, many months later, but my husband, one day when we were leaving for church, he said, I'm going to come with you. Oh. And so that was the beginning of him coming to mass. And so that was, his own interesting journey, but that was sort of my beginning.
That's amazing. That's amazing because for me, I have an affinity with the Blessed Mother under the title of Our Lady Undoer of Knots because...
That's my favorite one!
Yes! Oh my gosh.
That's my favorite.
This was the knot for me. So my wife and I, right, we met in a non-denominational church. That was our whole, our friend group and everything. And I became Catholic ahead of her. And when I told her that I was thinking of becoming Catholic, I'd kind of secretly been reading different things and watching YouTube late at night, different lectures from Scott Hahn, one of his 50 different lectures on the fourth cup, right? And I came to her and I told her, look, I think I'm becoming Catholic. I don't know what else to do. And we had a great big argument, a huge fight, and she slept downstairs and I slept in a different room that night. And that was the first time that I ever prayed to Mary. And I said, look, undo this knot. I don't even know how, not that our marriage would be affected. Like you say, we both knew that this marriage was a sacred thing. We're not going to get divorced or be becoming Catholic. But this was a major break in our relationship where suddenly we're not on the same page in our faith, and we always were all the way along in our relationship. And so the first time I prayed to Mary, and help, basically the similar prayer that you prayed, help undo this knot. And I remember the next morning, I woke up, my wife had actually spent most of that night researching Mary on the internet, reading different articles, and came and goes, do you know the Catholic Church believes this and this and this and this? And suddenly she was teaching me things the next morning.
Oh
so,
God.
And the night before I thought, oh my gosh, this is hopeless cause. How are we ever going to reconcile this situation? And, that night, the next morning, it was this drastic, it wasn't all solved in one night. I did become Catholic and she did it a year after me. She did RCIA the following year, but I have such a strong affinity for, Mary Undoer of Knots, because that was the knot that I brought. And the very first time I ever prayed to Mary was this, and that knot was then, beautifully kind of undone in the course of the following months and year. So I think that's an amazing, connection I have with your story. And yeah, what an amazing thing, and an encouragement for people who might be in that situation, right? That we were in, where a spouse, because this happens all the time. I think more with men than women, because usually we're the guys that rush into the burning building and go become Catholic and then like leave our poor wives behind. I've had, you know, dozens of guys in the show with that story, right? But for any relationship with the spouse is not following closely behind or is surprised by the sudden conversion, right? That's it. This is the route. Yeah, bring that to the Blessed Mother. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's funny, my story is actually exactly like yours. I came into the church in 2016, and then Shlomi, my husband, he came in 2017. So it was the same thing. It was like, you know, one right after another. His journey was a little bit different than mine, but yeah, like I wasn't worried. But I think it is a great encouragement, because people ask me all the time, like, your Israeli atheist husband who became a, you know, evangelical is now a Catholic, you know, like how does that work? And I'm like, and the joke always is like, Shlomi will always be like, if God got me, he will get you. Like, you know, because he's like the most extreme example, you know, and he's like a wonderful Catholic, you know, he's a wonderful Catholic, and he loves the church and he loves the Blessed Mother, and you know, and yeah, so it is encouraging, because I know people are sometimes feel very hopeless, but you know, she's the go-to. She's definitely who you go to when you have that situation, hands down. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you talked about your writing career too, like the sacrifices that you make in becoming Catholic, and yeah, especially if you are writing in, you know, that Christian context, you're going to sacrifice this kind of thing. But I know now some of those things are being given back to you, right? Which again is a great example for those who are watching, listening to this, who are like, how do I sacrifice all these things? Just trusting that God gives them back in some way when I become Catholic. Like, talk about that for a minute. Like, what's that experience like for you?
Well, first of all, it's obedience. And I think that, and I'm still learning. Listen, we're all learning, because I feel like it was a 40-year journey in the Exodus, and I woke up one day and I had 4,000 Twitter followers and a writing career. You know, it was bizarre, but it's obvious that's clearly not what happened. But, you know, what I'm learning too is, you know, I've had my work published. You know, it's not anything new in terms of like being published in a Catholic genre for me versus a Christian genre. But God sort of had to test me in a way, you know, are you going to be obedient to me? Because it wasn't a moment of Abraham and Isaac where he's like, I'm going to provide you the sacrifice. He was like, no, you're going to be the sacrifice, you know? And I think there are some moments he, you know, we have those Abraham and Isaac moments where he does provide a sacrifice. And then there's sometimes when he's like, hey, fish or cut bait, you know, you're either following me or you're not. And because I think too, my problem was I sort of worshiped my writing. Like that was the most important thing, like everything, you know, and I think we do that with things we love. We make them idols, you know, and we can so quickly sort of deflect our attention. And God had to really rid me of some of that, in terms of like, he's like, hey, this is mine. I gave you this gift, you know, and you're going to write what I tell you to write, you know, and you're going to, you know, publish where, and obviously he's not that kind of God, but meaning like, you know, you got to be obedient to me. And that was a huge reason that I started with Missio Dei, was because, you know, I had tried to sort of look at some bigger publishers, and, you know, I am kind of an outcast. You know, I have a weird story. I have trauma in my story. I'm a Jewish person, which is already controversial in the church. And you know, I had met Philip. Actually, I met Philip, my editor, while I was blogging and on my site, which was God is in my typewriter. That was my blog. And so I would always write for him. He'd be like, hey, come write on my site. You know, I'm like, okay, cool. Because I was a new Catholic, and he just loved me. Like, he was just like, hey, you know, you're just a great writer. And, you know, we kept in touch all these years. And so when he reached out to me about, you know, being part of Missio Dei, I was like, oh, I'm in. I was like, this dude has been with me for 6-7 years. He tells me I can write whatever I want. You know, and God was all about it. God was like, you know, it's such a God story, right? It was like this no-name independent publication, and I'm an indie girl, you know. I was like, oh, it's independent, we're outcasts, you know. And I loved it. And so like me and Philip and this other gentleman, Jonathan, who's part of Missio Dei, the startup, it just like, again, overnight, you know, everything sort of took off. And I don't know. I mean, it's really been sort of a dream come true, but it's also about, you know, now when I see my work published, it's not about it being published. You know, now for me, what it's about is connection. and vulnerability. And, because listen, a lot of people are like, here, you were a lawyer in the criminal justice system for 20 years. You have a lot to say about justice. And I'm like, I do. I was like, but that's not what God called me to do. God called me to tell a very personal, intimate, and very vulnerable story over and over again in many different contexts about many different topics, specifically in the area of mental health. But also to my message really in my writing is always, if you've ever read it, and my writing is talking about redemptive suffering, that our suffering, right, has a place to go. And so I've learned now as my writing career has come back to me, and been restored, is I don't get that rush anymore. Like when something big of mine is published, or, another chapter of my book is published on Missio Dei or whatever. When someone reaches out to me and is like, I've read your article on suicide, and I read your article that you went to therapy, or I read your article that, I went through that too. I thought it was hopeless, then I'm like, okay, Lord, like I got the message, and I think it takes a bit of working on your ego, to be able to do that. And I had a long way to go with that. It wasn't some outward external, like, oh, I'm the best writer. It wasn't that. It was just like, again, I was just worshiping the writing rather than worshiping the creator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you one more thing, and I want to ask you how becoming Catholic maybe shaped or reshaped the experience of trauma. Like, was there, because I know for me, the idea of redemptive suffering, as you just mentioned, was really foreign to my, I didn't know what that was as an evangelical Christian, right? I learned that as a Catholic. I had a few guests on this show talking about those topics and the importance of that and how that and trauma can kind of connect, and suffering can connect. Was that, like, what was your experience like in that context of becoming Catholic? Did that change how you saw those experiences of trauma, or in any way?
Oh, it completely did. I wrote an article not too long ago about using the sacrament of anointing of the sick for severe illness, particularly severe mental illness. And I had occasion, unfortunately or fortunately, to use it sometime last year, and had a miraculous recovery, because obviously I'm sitting here talking to you. I think that very tangible, visible sign of the church, that we just don't want to run to for some reason, whether it be, receiving the Eucharist in Mass, or going to confession, or, all those things that the church provides for us, it's sort of like an inclination, right? Like, oh, that's not going to work. I'm going to go do all these other very worldly things. But what I found was during my very hardest year, which was last year, I was finding myself sort of doing those very external things. And then finally, when God let me sort of go to the end of my rope, he's like, okay, are you ready to come, back and do these things? And so I started to go to confession, pretty regularly. And I received the sacrament of anointing of the sick. And I started to understand the wounds of Christ. And one of the things that kept coming up in my writing over and over and over again is this very hidden wound of betrayal. Because I think sometimes when you don't have a physical illness, you have a mental illness, whether that's depression or anxiety. I even hate the word mental illness, but you're struggling with a mental health issue. You just can't, for some reason, connect. It's like, I want to put my hands in that wound, but I don't necessarily get that. But when you think of the first wound of betrayal, there's not a human being on the face of the earth that can't place their hands over their heart and feel how Jesus felt when he was betrayed. And so I think in that redemptive suffering, I'm like, my suffering has somewhere to go. I have a wound, that I can marry my pain to. I can offer up my pain. That's part of redemptive suffering, which I do quite frequently. And I also can go and receive the sacraments. And writing that article, which was terrifying, by the way, because nobody knew how bad, things were. If it wasn't for a very wonderful priest on Twitter, Father Benjamin, who reached out to me and was talking to me about it and the importance of getting the article out. And he actually, read it before and, edited it and all that stuff. The response that I got was overwhelming. I can't tell you how many Catholics didn't know that, they could go and ask their priests for the anointing in their severe mental illness, whatever it might be. And I was shocked to learn that people didn't know that. So I think, in all of those things, it's just this constant reminder to me to go back to the sacraments, that are, freely available to us as Catholics, and stop running to the world to try to, solve our problems, which unfortunately many times is our first inclination.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and that's an incredible work that you're doing with that kind of stuff. I mean, that's really important and amazing. Again, amazing way to. I don't want to say like reframe or redeem the suffering that you went through, although suffering is part of that. But I think pointing other Catholics towards those resources and that stuff, I think is incredible. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, well, I always tell people, people are like, "Oh, you have such a unique charism." I'm like, "Do you want it?" Because I certainly don't want to be up the cross. It's like, I'll take that nice like Marian flair.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Well, thanks for your response to that. I mean, thanks for carrying that cross. I mean, thank you for living that out. I mean, that's important, and that can be hard. Gosh.
Yeah, it is hard daily, but we have to carry our crosses daily, and each of us has a unique cross. And I find that the more vulnerable I am, the more God sort of blesses me in that way to say, see, like there was a soul out there that I needed to get to, and you did it. You did it for me,
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. I want to give you a second to tell us a bit more about where people can go to find you and to follow you, and this book that is coming out chapter by chapter, and say thanks for being here. I mean, your journey is a fascinating one, an incredible one to have unpacked for us. And I hope that a lot of listeners will resonate with it and pieces of it, and be encouraged and be inspired to dig deeper in their own faith, and be inspired by you on a daily basis on Twitter if they want to. Because I know I am really. Where can people go to find you and follow you and plug into things that you're doing? Where do you want to point them towards?
So I ended up just creating a website because it's kind of like a one-stop shop, melissapresser.com. It's got everything you need to know, my email address, all the places I write, because I write for a variety of places, and Twitter. My home is missiodeicatholic.org. That's my home, my writing home, and my first love. And so you can go check it out there. My book, Walk the Land, is available for paid subscribers. And I think we're asking something ridiculously low, like $5 a month, and to support our ministry. We're a startup, and so, we're funding this whole venture. So, we just ask to contribute minimally so that we can get our writers' work out there. I'm not the only writer. Obviously, there are many, many beautiful writers at Missio Dei Catholic. And also on Twitter, I'm MZ Presser. You can come hang out. Most days are totally awesome, and then some days I get canceled. So that's Twitter, right? But I try, especially on Twitter, to encourage, to inspire. I post all of my writing on there, so you can join in our little community. And I've heard stories of people meeting up because of my Twitter page, and meeting friends and things like that. So those are all the places that you can find me. I also have a Patheos page, which is Patheos Walk the Land, where I give tips about Catholic content and comment on some of the stories that are going on in the Catholic world. And so all of that you can find on melissapresser.com.
That's awesome. And I'll put links to that in the show notes for this show on a podcast and on YouTube. Melissa, thanks for being here. Thanks for this conversation. I'm looking forward to it for a while since we first connected. So I'm really happy to talk to you finally and to bless listeners with your story and your journey. And hopefully they're inspired and encouraged. And so thank you. And I want to say God bless the work you're doing for the church each and every day. And thanks so much. Thanks so much for being here this week.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.